Prince George is known as the gateway to northern British Columbia. And ever since the arrival of steel a century ago, railways have defined this place. On the banks of the Fraser River at the site of Old Fort George, a small group of retired men begin their day in a long metal shed. Inside is cool and dark.
Just getting ready to put in the basin in the fire to get it going.
This is the home of the Little Prince.
When it's cold and hasn't been warm the day before, it's about 3 hours.
An expert crew is required to maintain a little train that was built in 1912.
I was just thinking on the back here that if we shim the spring with more spring pressure to seat it firmer on the cone.
Well, if you listen to Nuts Off, it's got about, I'm going to say, about an inch of compression on the spring.
Yeah, okay. So there's lots of spring.
Each man brings a skill from his working life.
Well, we have some leakage on the right-hand side steam cylinder. Jerry is a millwright. We have Lou, who's a heavy-duty mechanic. We have Nick, who's a steam engineer, as well as myself. And Tom is an expert in steels and things like that. So
To this crew, the Little Prince is a special machine.
the simplicity of the mechanics, I mean, basically we have one gauge in that engine that gives us the steam pressure. And other than that, we don't have any electronics, any feedback from anything.
You're left-handed, I got to do it.
I already messed up. I should have done the first 2 threads. As long as the boiler tubes don't leak or anything like that, no, it literally run forever and ever.
This is a steam day.
Is that right, Nick? You're going to dump steam one more and then go? Yeah.
And for the next several hours, the Little Prince is running again. The Little Prince is located at Lightly Tene Memorial Park, close to the spot where it first arrived over a century ago.
When you're building a train line in the middle of nowhere, there's literally no infrastructure. Quite often they use temporary smaller work trains called dinky trains that would work alongside the larger rail bed as they were creating it.
5 dinky trains were floated up the Fraser River to Prince George.
There's no railways, there's no roads, there's a river. And so they brought the dinky train up here to be able to use in the construction of the railway on a steamer.
Unlike massive wide-gauge steam engines, little dinkies ran across land with little preparation.
So an actual rail line that's meant to be permanent, they actually do quite a bit of underlay work. It's called ballast. For a dinky train, you actually don't need any of that. It's just floating on top of the ground because it doesn't need to be permanent and it's not holding nearly as much weight.
Dinky trains helped build bridges across wild rivers. It was dangerous work.
There's actually so many images showing the bridge construction, the large Grand Trunk Pacific Bridge over the Fraser River, and using the dinky train along a trestle temporary bridge right alongside it, or else it would have just been impossible to move those heavy beams and that material.
A dinky train is a true example of the little engine that could.
All toys are a little bit based on reality, and thinking about steam trains, yes, it looks like a toy and it brings that same magic to children today, but it was a serious, serious tool. It was serious horsepower that a man just couldn't produce at the time.
The arrival of steel opened up the north to mining and forestry and changed it forever.
There has been human habitation here for 9,000 years. You see resource extraction starting to really go through the roof when the trains arrived.
At 2.2 kilometers, the Little Prince runs on Canada's shortest rail line. It weighs around 6 tons, running on a 2-foot wide track. Early in its life, this dinky train was retrofitted to run on wood fuel because coal was in short supply in northern British Columbia.
All right, here we go. Can I have your ticket, please? Good job. And then would you like that back? There you are. Come on in, any seat that suits your fancy.
Tracy Caligaros runs the Exploration Place. On steam days, she is the conductor on the Little Prince rail line.
I often joke that that's my retirement gig. I'll be a railway CEO. I get to talk to the kids and the parents and the adults, everyone that comes. It's just It's a good day, always is.
Steam days are always popular in Prince George.
All right, here we go. That's a hard tear these days.
It's a bit of a miracle that the Little Prince is here at all.
So the Little Prince was actually sidelined pretty soon after the railway was built, because building that kind of gauge, that specific track for it, just wasn't productive when the real track was there.
At some point, folks decided that watching these trains rot away was silly, so they started to try and put pieces together, and they set it up as a display, essentially, outside of the Visitor Information Center for Tourism Prince George.
People could see the Little Prince, but he couldn't run.
Are you ready for you? Sure. Excellent, thank you. You want that back, or you don't really need it?
There was the piece connected.
I see that. It wasn't until the 70s that the mayor of the day decided that what he wanted to do was get it back in use, which I am not even sure how you dream that up from a stationary object that sat for so long.
Now the Little Prince runs on an official rail line, governed by the Canada Transportation Act.
It's a yard is what they call it in Canadian railroad rules. We operate separate from the main line. Are you ready to ride on that train? Do you think it'll be fun? You'll get a turn to go by. We don't cross any roads, so it is just a self-contained, closed loop that allows this train to take kids and adults and you name it on rides around the park. So ladies and gentlemen and children of all ages, welcome to the Fort George Railroad. You guys are about to embark on the most fun you can have in Prince George while sitting down.
The forestry industry in the area actually developed as a consequence, really, of the railway, because they go hand in hand. So it's been an important place for multiple peoples over a long, long period of time.
I don't think there's anything historic about rail. It is going to continue to be a very important way that we transport goods and people, but primarily it's freight these days. With the increase in shipping coming out of China and Japan and that part of the world coming through into the breadbasket of the U.S., coming through Prince George on rail or by air is actually a shorter route. So from the Prince George perspective, rail is very important to becoming that hub for distribution in all of North America.
When you look at the trains passing through Prince George, we're talking about lumber, raw wood, chips, coal. And this is something that if you're a citizen here, you're going to see every single day.
Most Canadian trains carry freight, but the Little Prince carries people.
We'll do 2 laps. When you come back through this platform, please stay seated until the train comes to a complete stop. And make sure you wave at everybody out there in the park that wasn't smart enough to get a ticket for the train. What do you think? All right, guys, we're all ready to go. When you hear the all aboard, that's when the whistles go. All aboard!
Kids are just amazed by trains. They're larger than life, and the Little Prince just makes that so much more attainable for them. It's not just something they can look at from afar, it's something that they can experience.
You know, there was so many things that relied on the arrival of that train. When it came into town, commerce happened, family got together, friends met up again. I think that it's that role of being the connector in people's lives.
You know, it is just that peaceful feeling, and that it's going to go and it's going to work. It's like it has and as it should. It feels kind of special to me because it's kind of like the best train set in the world. Like, there is no better train set than this one.
It's a classic ride for the child in all of us.
Even today, look at the happy faces on this train. Hi, guys. Choo-choo.
Little Prince, a significant landmark in Prince George, BC, a living railroad from the past that connects us to its future.
So the Little Prince is actually out of Davenport, Iowa. It's a 1912 dinky engine, and that is legitimately what they called them, was dinky engines. And their job was to build the initial Grand Trunk Pacific. So they're a narrower gauge. They fit between the rails of the main line. So him and 4 other dinkies came up here on sternwheeler, and they are the ones that built the Grand Trunk Pacific. That's an east-west, so it runs through Prince George, it comes out of Edmonton, runs right through to the coast, so out to what's now the Prince Rupert port. I don't think there's anything historic about rail. It is going to continue to be a very important way that we transport goods and people, but primarily it's freight these days. And it's with the increase in shipping coming out of China and Japan and that part of the world coming through into the breadbasket of the US, coming through Prince George on rail or by air is actually a shorter route. So from the Prince George perspective, rail is very important to becoming that hub for distribution in all of North America. I know that it wasn't an extended period of time because really by the time they got here they were in the last legs of the Grand Trunk construction, and they were what were moving the crew and the equipment both east of town and west of town. So they weren't on the rails long, and when they completed it, one of the dinkies was at the driving of the last spike, and then they really were retired to just sit as playground equipment for all intents and purposes for the kids of the day in this part of Prince George. Well, everybody loves trains, and particularly these unique little steam engines. So at some point, folks decided that watching these trains rot away was silly, so they started to try and put pieces together, and they set it up as a display essentially outside of what's now the VIA station and the Visitor Information Center for Tourism Prince George. So it sat there for a good 20-30 years just as an iconic piece that talked about the arrival of steel with the cairn just down the road from it. It wasn't until the 70s that the mayor of the day, Moffat, decided that what he wanted to do was get it back in use. So we actually operate Canada's shortest railroad. I often joke that that's my retirement gig. I'll be a railway CEO. We don't cross any roads, so it is just a self-contained, closed loop that allows this train to take kids and adults and you name it on rides around the park. Our train actually operates on wood fire, not on coal. So when the fire bans are in, we can't run the trains. I'm already getting phone calls of folks that are desperately trying to get tickets and to get back onto the train for this weekend. So I'm excited. I know it's going to be busy. I think it's the size of it and the power and the fact that you can see them everywhere, but no one seems to have any control over them. So they're sort of mysteries to kids. For adults, I think there's a lot of the romance of the era of that getting on a train and traveling west and Manifest Destiny and everything else that goes along with it. When they were bringing them into northern Canada for the development of the Canadian railways, it was pretty clear that we were going to have to truck coal in to go with them. So they retrofitted them, I guess, is how they did it, and it became a wood box to use the fuel that we had easily at hand here as opposed to having to pack coal. So it was innovative even then. There has been human habitation here for 9,000 years, and I would argue that it's always been about a crossroads, whether it is the confluence of the two rivers coming together or the arrival of steel, which also was key to the development of the industrialization post-contact. But I think that when you start to talk about North Central BC, which is Prince George in a nutshell, you're really talking about logistics. We are the place that people fuel up and get organized when they're headed north or west. The arrival of steel here in Prince George really was life-changing. Even the talk of the arrival of steel caused an uproar in the communities that lived in this area. Western civilization, piece of technology, completely transformed how people thought about this part of the world, and being able to move product and people on rails really did change the amount of time it took to get here or to get things out of here. So you see resource extraction starting to really go through the roof when the trains arrived. I think that all technologies are double-edged. You know, we can find these wonderful advancements, but often with that comes new questions and new challenges that we hadn't considered. It may have been great for industrial development, but the arrival of steel was not good for the Indigenous population of the day. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us as we start to look at the future to really consider what we're doing and have the impacts, or at least try and imagine what the impacts might be. One of the most important things, I think, for museums or any sort of heritage installations is the opportunity it gives us to reflect on not just our accomplishments, but the impacts of those accomplishments. And so when you have something like this living artifact that you do in The Little Prince, people are excited and they want to get on it, but you have this chance to teach them. History is so important to inform the decisions we're making going forward, and I don't think that there's any less of that, whether it's a train or a dinosaur or a living fossil like a sturgeon. We've always got the opportunity to learn from our past if we're smart enough to pay attention.
So the Prince George region was really opened up because of resources. That's why people were coming up here. Prince George is located at the confluence of the Nechako and the Fraser rivers, so it's been an important place for multiple peoples over a long, long period of time. The railway itself opened up to so much more industry being begun. Of course, you can only carry so much on a paddle wheeler. So when you're building a train line in the middle of nowhere, there's literally no infrastructure. Looking at early pictures of Prince George, it was one street. And then there was just this train station at the end of it and City Hall on the other end. But even just moving workers and then moving these large pieces of steel rail, they would need something to do that. And quite often they used temporary smaller work trains called dinky trains that would work alongside the larger rail bed as they were creating it. So an actual rail line that's meant to be permanent, they actually do quite a bit of underlay work. They'll dig out an area, they'll level it out, they'll make sure there's drainage, and then they'll put like the pebbles that you see on top by the rails, it's called ballast. There's actually so many images showing the bridge construction, the large Grand Trunk Pacific Bridge over the Fraser River, and using the dinky train along a trestle temporary bridge right alongside it, or else it would have just been impossible to move those heavy beams and that material. All toys are a little bit based on reality and, thinking about steam trains. So dinky trains, the Little Prince specifically, yes, it looks like a toy and it brings that same magic to children today, but it was a serious, serious tool. It was serious horsepower that a man just couldn't produce at the time. Kids are just amazed by trains. They're larger than life, and the Little Prince just makes that so much more attainable for them. It's not just something they can look at from afar, it's something that they can experience. There's no railways, there's no roads, there's a river. So you go on a steamship. And so they brought the dinky train up here to be able to use the construction of the railway on a steamer. Dinky trains were mostly used in construction of railway because of their temporary nature, and so their actual period of use wasn't that long. So the Little Prince was actually sidelined pretty soon after the railway was built, because building that kind of gauge, that specific track for it, just wasn't productive when the real track was there. It was actually stationed in front of the railway station downtown, and it was a showpiece for many years, and people loved looking at it. The history of railway in the north, a very small amount of it is really about passengers. It's about lumber, it's about coal, it's about different minerals, because that's what's being transported. There's been so many specific rail lines coming to this area that were specifically made just to carry resources such as the Tumbler Ridge Line. So nowadays, Prince George is really a hub of railway because of those lines intersecting. So not only can resources go to Prince Rupert at the coast, but they can go south to Vancouver also, which just wasn't the case once upon a time. When you look at the trains passing through Prince George, we're talking about lumber, raw wood, chips, coal, and this is something that if you're a citizen here, you're going to see every single day.